Good morning and welcome to Wednesday morning devotion. And hopefully you will be seeing this on Wednesday morning. We have to apologize. Mark and I haven't gotten those devotions up on time the last couple of weeks, but we have vowed to do better. So this week
it's okay. We are just glad you do it.
I am flawed. Like in the gospel today when they talk about James and John, and they talk about, they're flawed, and that's
well, me too. You know, we are Christians. We should be practicing forgiveness, right?
Good.
Well, we've been talking about wanting a name for our group. We could be the Flawed Females.
That's it. If you can think of a better name than the Flawed Females, no, I think we should be able to come up with one. But this week we are
censorship on the notes on Facebook.
We are talking about Isaiah chapter 53, verses 4 through 12, Psalm 91, 9 through 16, Hebrews 5, 1 through 10, and our gospel this week is from Mark chapter 10. Verses 35 through 45. And we really haven't talked ahead of time today. So, ladies, flawed females, what do you have for us today?
Well, I have what has been going through my mind has been, what's your favorite verse, Michelle, in the Bible? That's what I've been thinking to myself. And it's going to be like Psalm 91, for God will give the angels charge over you so you won't stub your foot and blah, blah, blah. And then we have all these other readings that we don't necessarily want to read, which is Isaiah 53 and Hebrews, where they're talking about suffering and,
a lot of suffering.
Bruises. I mean, it's really a kind of a horrifying thing that we have in the Isaiah reading of what this person goes through.
Talking about your favorite verse, I have a really good friend who has said verse 5 from Isaiah often when I've spoken with her. With his wounds we are healed. And she must keep that, on her tongue a lot because, and I think just a reminder that it's okay to be flawed because he died for us. We are healed. All of these flaws we have will be better.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because I always think, pre-studying of the Bible, I always kind of put those disciples on a pedestal, I think. And I said, these are Jesus' chosen, and they must have been, a little bit above everyone else. And when you read Mark, it does show them as models, but then it also shows, especially James and John, who's fighting over who's going to sit on the right and the left.
Yeah.
Like, it does show that they were flawed as well. And again, we were talking a little bit about how it's hard sometimes because we don't know the context of when it was written and why it was written. And so we sometimes internalize things to make it fit into our lives that, the disciples are flawed, so it's okay for me to be flawed, and we can be the flawed females, and I think that's okay. But again, I just found that really interesting, was that.
Well, I have had to say to myself constantly in my ministry, and there Martin Luther has a wonderful prayer too that he had it. So, but that God doesn't call us to be perfect. God calls us to be faithful. Right? And God doesn't call us to be successful. God calls us to be faithful. So all we can do is be faithful.
Yeah. Well, going back to James and John, and I think this is funny. We were going to do a Bible study of The Chosen, the video series, and we never got to that yet. But there is an episode on James and John and how they think that they're special because
they were chosen.
All the rest of the disciples had to go to town and they had all these jobs to do. And Jesus had James and John stay back. But instead what he had them do was plant this, plow this field, and they thought it was something, special, and really they were doing it for someone who couldn't do it himself, or
And his family would starve without
yeah. So they were serving without realizing they were serving, and Mark, our gospel is a lot about leading by example, and how Jesus led by example, and that's what he's wanting us to do. Instead of lording something over someone and thinking that you are better than someone else, you should be serving. And I think, aren't the best leaders the ones that lead by example?
Yeah, I think so. If you're not living it yourself, I mean,
Yeah.
you got to at least be
Servant
trying.
leadership.
Right.
I mean, that's what, we just talked about that at the Sunday supper when Michelle was helping, and I said, servant leadership going on. Yes.
Well, what I think too, you look at that, where is it, where it says, whoever will be first will be last, and whoever last will be first and everything. I think to myself with that, I don't really want to be first, and I don't want to be last. I just want to be in the middle.
I just want to be part of the group.
So I'm not sure what that, exactly.
I don't want to stand out where somebody will see me at the front or the back. I just want to blend in.
Yeah. So I wonder what Jesus does with us, because I'm just playing it safe in life, and I don't know.
But then we've got Hebrews, that verse 4 talks about called by God, and you used the word called a little bit ago for James and John and
us.
And us, and you also referred to it when we were talking previously about the bishop, having the bishop being called. And I was just wondering, is this kind of this verse where pastors, why do they say you were called? Is it like Jesus is, you hear Jesus saying this is what you should do? Or why do we say called? We don't say that for like another profession.
But
Or do we?
Martin Luther would have. He would have said you are called to be a teacher.
Yes.
You are called to be a mother. You are called to be, Martin Luther would have used that. He sees your teaching is the call that God has given to you to go into the world to share the love of God.
And I've heard it more so in the service type of professions like teaching or nursing or something like that you were called to do that.
And Martin Luther uses the example of a bricklayer. If the bricklayer goes out and does the best job that he can do laying those bricks and does it for the glory of God, that is as important of a calling as the person who stands in the pulpit or whatever else you want to choose as an example. But your calling is important.
And I think that before our time is up, I really want to hear
The time is up.
about Psalm 91.
We try to keep it to 10 minutes.
Yes. Because you had a really cool thing about Psalm 91 that you had gone to.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. When I looked at Psalm 91, I have notes written in my Bible from two different places. The first one was, it reminded me of the weekend that I went with my mom's church to their women's retreat. And they did the whole weekend on Psalm 91. And granted, we don't have all of those verses for this week, but the beginning part, verses 1 through 13, there's a lot of things coming at you. Pestilence, I don't even remember what they are, but
Arrows.
okay, so yeah, lots of bad things. Darkness. Okay, so
bad.
So what
Things that would hurt you.
right. So what they had was they had this umbrella, and they put up this umbrella, and they read through Psalm 91, and they talked about how God's grace and Christ dying on the cross for us is like this umbrella that we can stand under. We can stand under His love and His grace, and all of these bad things that might happen in your life, they just kind of just roll off that umbrella. They'll hit and they'll bounce off, or they'll roll off, and you don't get that. It doesn't affect you like it would if you didn't have your umbrella of God up, if that makes sense. And the second place.
Well, what's nice with that too is the recognition that those things still come into our
Right.
lives.
Yeah.
You know, and that recognition that even though those things come, that we have the ability to get through them because we have that added protection.
Right. I can put up that umbrella of Christ while I'm going through those
Right.
things and have something to help. I also had written in my margin that I had listened to Jordan Bulk's Bible study on Psalm 91 a couple of summers ago, so thank you, Lois and Jordan, that he had talked about how verses 1 through 13 is written as the confidence of the believer in Christ, and verses 14 through 16 is God's response or God speaking. And I hadn't ever looked at it that way before or recognized it. I mean, now that I reread it with my notes in it, it makes sense, and I listened to Jordan's devotion on it. But I don't know that I would have seen it that way had I not listened to the devotion. So.
And you said that happens often in the Bible, where there's a writer writes some things and then there's God's response.
Yeah. Isaiah has a lot of good examples of that, where people say, people are like grass, the grass withers, and then God responds. And,
We have so much more to learn, but our time is up.
Well, and it's interesting. I always think to myself, after we finish, there's always so much more to say. Yes. And it's like, well, maybe we should talk about this again next week.
But then what about next
week? But then we'll never get through it.
Yeah,
because there's always more to study in the Bible.
There is. Yep. So thank you for joining us. We hope that we will see you again next week, and we hope you have a great week.